Helping you make the most of your retirement. This is the Retirement Years Podcast. Here are your hosts, Mary Ellen French and Dave Wing.
Hi there, I'm Mary Ellen.
And I'm Dave. And on this episode, we're going to speak with two individuals who chose to become an end-of-life or a death doula. They provide a service that we weren't really aware of until quite recently, and they offer valuable assistance when one is dealing with a death.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I certainly had no idea what a death doula was until actually in person, each of these women mentioned to me separately that that was something that they did. And I was really intrigued, right, by what that was. So I was really happy when they each said, "Oh yeah, no, I'd love to come on the podcast." And for Stephanie, it's coming on the podcast again because she was one of our guests. Yeah, she was one of our guests in season 2, episode 5 on community rec centers.
Well, I know if I asked somebody at a cocktail party what they did, and this was their answer, it'd be somebody I would be glued to for the next half hour or so, because that's interesting conversation over crackers and cheese. Our other guest today is Lisa, and Lisa works locally in the public library system. And we met her when we were looking for recording space, and the library for which she works had recently set up, I guess you could refer to it as a studio. That makes it sound pretty fancy, but they had the equipment we could use to record the podcast. And often we'd have time to chat with Lisa before and after, so we got to know her fairly well. So nice that both of those individuals would come and speak with us on this. And we asked both Lisa and Stephanie what a death doula does. And here's what they had to say. I think many people have heard of doulas who assist parents at the beginning of life during their child's birth, but probably not as many have heard of end of life or a death doula.
Yeah, so someone will reach out to a doula, a death doula, because they want someone to guide them along through the process of dying.
So, Stephanie, what does an end-of-life doula do for a client?
Well, it depends on when they have been brought on to that patient's care. If they're not terminally ill, like they're still healthy and everything's okay, we are more so looking at death planning and creating vigils and legacy projects. And down the road would be the grieving and bereavement care. But if somebody is terminally ill and they have reached out for our services, we can still do all 4 of those components. But obviously it's going to be within a shorter time frame, and some parts may be taken out, some parts may be kept in. But basically we help them go through the end of life journey from the day that they're diagnosed with a terminal illness, planning their death, making sure their wills are in check. They have a next contact of next of kin, trustees, executors. We do all of that stuff and help facilitate those conversations. We also assist with the funeral planning. Obviously, we're working with the individual and their families. It's not just exclusive to one. And we also do some, depending on the individual, some spiritual work as well, just to help them navigate their end-of-life journey and come to peace with what is going to be happening, but also helping the families understand how that individual is feeling. So it's making sure that the whole family is still on the same page and are able to move through the last few months, weeks, days as peacefully as they possibly can.
So in a sense, it sounds like part of your role then would be an advocate for the patient themselves.
Correct. Yes. So an example would be, so say somebody found out they're terminally ill, let's say cancer, and their prognosis was very dire. Maybe they had a year left of their life to live. That individual may request some resources regarding the medical assistance in dying or MAID, knowing that they're not able to live their life to the fullest and they don't necessarily want to be on this earth going through the ups and downs of terminal illness. So we would provide those resources to that individual. And if that individual decides that that's the route they would like to take, we would find a physician that is suitable for that type of treatment. We would help them arrange everything, make sure that the family's understanding as to what's going on, and help answer any of those questions. And then we would be with that person on their final day as well.
So, Lisa, then if someone is looking, like, what exactly does a death doula do and what don't they do? And then, like, if I'm looking to find, a death doula on the internet, well, like, what would I be putting in my search engine?
So first, to search, you could look up death doula. So you could do death doula Ontario, or if you're in Northumberland, death doula Northumberland, or death doula Canada. Also under that is end of life doula, or you could look up end of life care. So there's a couple of things. Also death coaching. So that's kind of how I classify myself, because there's some aspects of the doula part that I don't do. Like I won't be vigiling or any of those, but I'm more coach. So death coaching is another one that you could look up. So there's a couple that would get you a lot of information, actually. And so what death doulas do, or death coaches do, we do death planning. So that is like the nitty gritty, like getting everything in order, like your power of attorney, your life insurance policies, all of those documents that you need for your family to easily find. So putting them maybe in all one place. And then do you want extra measures taken to keep you alive in the hospital? Do you want to be in the hospital, or would you rather be at home? Most people, I can't remember the percentage, but most people would like to die at home, but most die in hospital. And you do have an option to not be in the hospital. You can have things put in place to be able to die at home. And then we're seeing a lot more hospices come about. So that's really good too, because those people are specialized in end of life care. So that is a good place to be also. So we also, death doulas also do legacy work. And this is what I really like to think about and help people with is after you're gone, what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? So it's thinking about things. We go immediately to legacy work, meaning leaving money to a charity, but there are so many other things that you can do. And it may be like writing a poem. It may be putting a scrapbook together. It might be writing out the recipe that you're really well known for and making sure that it's passed down to your loved ones. So it's thinking outside of the box about legacy work. And I really like that just with what I do, because I do recreation and leisure also. So it's a good mix. And then death doulas advocate on behalf of the dying person. So it's not what the family wants, it's what the dying person wants. And they're there to advocate to the nurses, to the doctors, to make sure that the person who's dying gets what they are wanting. And then we do vigil sitting. I just mentioned that. So we sit bedside, can, just sit there, hold a hand, maybe it just is just sitting in the room so that the person is not alone when they are dying. You could be reading a book. You could be making sure that they have their playlist that they want playing while they're dying is on, making sure the flowers that they hate are not brought into the room, those kinds of things, like very specific. And then provide comforting practices. So again, that kind of fits in with the vigil sitting. Supporting and facilitating discussions between family members. So it might be like, why don't you go hold your mother's hand right now? Or just, stroke her hair, like helping the family member, because family members don't know what to do. They sometimes are just standing there, like looking horrified, over what's happening. And just also reassuring family members that are witnessing what's happening, know that it's normal, right? Because there are certain stages to death. And because if you've never experienced that, that may be alarming. So it's just reassuring the family members that this is normal, this is the next stage, blah, blah, blah. And then some grief and bereavement support can happen before and after. So maybe the person who's dying is feeling grief, they need support, but then also after that person has passed away, following up with the family and seeing, just checking in, doing a check-in. So that's what death doulas do. That's a lot. It's a very wide range. But what death doulas don't do are make promises. Like, I promise you can die at home, because that might not happen. That might not be the case. And death doulas are not there to persuade or coerce you into making any decisions. We are only there as a facilitator to facilitate your choices and wishes. And we do not push our beliefs onto the client. We are a neutral in all aspects, whether that's religion or whatever. And we do not aid in any medical assessments, diagnosis, or medical decisions. That is not our place. And we are not medical personnel. And we do not give recommendations on MAID. That is something that you have to do with your physician. If you have questions about MAID, there can be some questions answered, but when it comes down to either requesting or looking further into MAID, which is medically assisted in dying, that is a discussion you have to have with your physician. So that's what we don't do.
That's really clear and really comprehensive, Lisa. Like, I think especially maybe for, like you were saying, Gen X, who haven't lost a loved one, there's a lot to be taken into consideration. And I'm so happy to hear that there are wonderful people out there like you who can help people through this process and can really help to normalize. Like, that's what, part of what you were saying there is you can help to normalize the dying process for people, because it is part of our human life cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, me, I'm always interested in language, right? Where the definition of doula is from Greek originally, right? I was really, they were so clear on what an end of life doula does and does not do. And you'll hear, listeners, you'll hear Dave and I interchange end of life doula and death doula. They're the same thing. They're just two different terms for the same thing. Interesting that they're not really medical per se, but they're definitely part of the healthcare system, or looking to be part of the healthcare system.
Right.
There was a interview with Sue Phillips, who's the former VP at the End of Life Doula Association of Canada. In an article, it was written under the umbrella of the Council of Palliative Care, which is part of McGill University in Quebec, Canada. And she was speaking about the End of Life Doula Association of Canada, or EOLDA. And she said, our goal is to fill the gaps in the healthcare system so that one day end of life doulas will be part of the standard circle of care. And that makes sense to me based on what we learned from Stephanie and Lisa.
Well, and I think that no matter how well your healthcare system runs, there are going to be gaps. And if we have a system that can have some of those gaps filled, I think it's excellent. And this was a very important one to anyone that's went through the process of caring for somebody in their final days.
Yeah.
And like we spoke about in past episodes with different guests, the topic of death is a hard one to broach. There's a lot of fear around it, a lot of taboo. Like, if you start saying something about it, it could happen. What I like about the service provided by End of Life Doula, it could be summed up in the approach that is on the End of Life Doula Association's website, and as part of their mission statement. And this is our approach to what we do. Our approach is holistic, individual, person-centered quality care. We see death as a process rather than an event that takes place over time. We see building relationships with the person as the key to supporting them in their journey. We see a person as being made up of unique set of circumstances and beliefs. We see the person as an individual. I think that's a very nice way to approach that. And they have the objectivity to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. So key, right?
Yeah.
So we were also curious about the training that someone would need to receive to become a death doula. And we also wanted to know more about whether there are professional organizations for end-of-life doulas.
Now, as we discussed earlier, there are associations of death doulas across our country, other countries as well. This, from what you've described already, it goes well beyond a good friend or good Samaritan that's comforting someone. That it's a lot more complicated than that. So what is the training, or what's available for training if someone listening is going, you know what, I'm a pretty empathetic person, I'd like to do that. What's that process like?
The training was actually pretty intense. So my training went through the Home Hospice Association. Again, that's located in Toronto, Ontario. There was a weekend intensive. So basically, we went through all the ethics, code of conduct, the different steps to working with individuals, working with people who are having difficulties understanding what's going on, and how to try to break everything down to their family. So we cover a whole range within that weekend intensive. But then after that, there are also assignments and a practicum to complete as well. So you have 1 year from the day that you not registered, but 1 year from the day that you took the weekend course to complete all the assignments. And most of them are written assignments, excluding the practicum, where you actually have to go out in the community and volunteer your time to get the practice you need in order to become a competent and compassionate death doula.
Now, if there's an organization, then is there any kind of is there a certification? I'm so curious about how, what path you take to become a death doula.
Yeah, so there is a regulation. So it's not licensed. So it's not like an occupational therapist or a medical laboratory technologist. They have to go through licensing and they renew every year. There is a regulatory body. And actually, the professor that I took the course with through Douglas College, she is heading a committee that is looking at making the industry more regulated. So putting in those policies and procedures and licensing officially. As of right now, there is not an official license for death doulas. So there is the End of Life Death Doula Association, and you can find that on the internet. And it lists, you can search different ways. So if you're looking for a specific province or town, or you're looking for a specific person, then that is where you would go, kind of that database. And then, of course, there's Google. So that's what I end up doing a lot when I'm looking for a death doula, just for information about what other death doulas are offering and stuff like that. I'll Google and see what I can find, because not everyone practices under the specific title of death doula, but they may be doing services that a death doula does.
Death doulas are very popular in the United States and in the UK. It's starting to blossom a little bit more in Australia, and I'm happy that Canada is finally working towards this. We're still advocating for the right for people to die with dignity. But with us in our society here in Canada, we're very much medicalized, where our healthcare system determines how and when a person dies, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. We want to make sure that the individual has complete control over the situation. But if anybody just Googles Death Doula International, there will be a couple of websites that pop up. If they are within Ontario or Canada, they can look up Home Hospice Association. They are located within Toronto, but they have death doulas that span across from coast to coast to coast. So there's lots of us in, at least in Ontario, that will be able to step up and help out if there's somebody who requests that assistance.
In their comments, they mentioned the training to become a doula, and from what we were able to find out, it's quite accessible. And
Yeah.
part of that was, as Lisa pointed out, during the pandemic, a lot of the education facilities had to sort of pivot. For example, Douglas College, Lisa mentioned,
Yep.
getting training from there. They're located in British Columbia. They offer the training in person or online with live classes over Zoom, realizing that a lot of this is dialogue. You can't just read a book and become empathetic. You have to have that piece. And Stephanie mentioned she was trained with the Home Hospice Association. They have an online offering, and it's a mix of synchronous and asynchronous learning. And any educators listening out there got to know the term synchronous and asynchronous very well through the pandemic.
Yes.
And Durham College here in Oshawa, near where I am, they offer a course. Now, I hope I'm saying this right, thanatology. It's a certificate course. And thanatology is the scientific study of how to cope with tragedies, death, and dying. The certificate aims to promote awareness and understanding of death and how it affects individuals, which would be great training for what a doula does.
Yeah, so lots of options for anyone who might be listening and is interested in finding out more about what it entails to become an end of life doula. I really liked what both Lisa and Stephanie said about the work that's being done by end of life doulas to create professional standards for themselves. Right? It's really grassroots. And there was when we checked out the Death Doula Ontario Network website, we discovered that that's been created so that end of life doulas can really further their own learning, and it gives them a supportive community for one another. And I think that's wonderful, and that's the Ontario one, and there's definitely other sort of smaller associations in different provinces as well. So next we asked each of our guests about why they chose to become a death doula.
Yeah, this was something that I had really wanted to do for quite some time, and it was just never feasible. It was an in-person class, and I had to go somewhere for a whole week, and that was just not possible. And then the pandemic happened, and everything went online. So this course was one of the things that went online, and I was able to do the course online, and it was just a no-brainer for me. I'd always been, I guess not always, but more recent, interested in end of life. And I did work in long-term care. So I was around end of life. I have vigiled with a resident that was dying. And I've also seen families in death denial. So, families that are coming in and they say, oh my gosh, we almost lost our dad. And could you imagine? And like this man is in his 90s and in incredible pain and suffering. And he almost died, but he didn't. And his daughters were so thankful that he didn't die. And I just thought, gosh, he needs to pass and to be relieved of his pain. And that the fact that his daughters couldn't see that was so intriguing to me. So, as I said, when the opportunity came up to take the course at Douglas College, I jumped on it. It's kind of an interesting path, I would say. I work at a library as well. And the other thing that I'm certified in is laughter yoga. And I once had someone say to me, well, laughter yoga and death dueling, that is, two very interesting extremes. And I thought, yeah, well, actually, not really, because what they both are is about living your life to the fullest. If you know you're going to die, then you want to live each day to the fullest. And laughter yoga is all about bringing joy into your life at no matter what age. And so they are actually not that different. It's all about living your life because we know that it's not always going to be here.
I could see those two things being complementary, and I would suspect that for you personally, they provide balance.
Yes. In days of darkness or in grief, or we can find moments of laughter, of joy. And absolutely, Mary Ellen, it is about balance. And we can have both of those things at the same time. Yes.
And I think that people believe that certain emotions are mutually exclusive, and we really need to consider a little bit more of the and, right? I can be 100%. In pain and I can be experiencing joy at the same time.
Yes.
Now you have a career in addition to being a doula. So what was it that attracted you to wanting to be a doula?
Well, actually, that goes back to when I was 7 years old. I didn't know anything about death doulas. Obviously, I don't believe it was that common back at that time. But I wanted to be a coroner, just to be able to provide answers and close cases for individuals and just give people peace of mind as to how their loved one passed away. I grew up in a household where we talked about death very freely. And my mom was a registered palliative nurse for over 40 years. So talking about death and dying and grieving was just normal conversation for us, not knowing that wasn't normal to other people. But for my household, it was pretty normal. And just over time, I just kept going back to the death industry, which I know sounds very ironic, but I just kept going back to it to pursue something, but I just didn't know how I wanted to pursue it. And then I came across this training and just something resonated with me. And I just went down that rabbit hole, and here I am as a certified death doula. And because of all of this, I'm hoping to go back to school and get my master's in psychotherapy and spiritual care so that I can continue to do not only just the death doula side, but also do the counseling and the support side as well.
What do you like best about being a death doula?
The people. You'd be very surprised how honest people get when they know they're faced with death. They can become very open and very transparent, which is amazing. I wish that we were all like that from day one and not put in that situation where we have to be open and honest. But it's hearing other people's stories about their life, where they came from. I have individuals who are telling me stories about being involved in some form of war within their former country and how they made their way to Canada and just started a better life, right? I've seen just the most amazing, I've heard just the most amazing stories and just the connections that people have and the meaning that they assign to whatever they've gone through in their life. It's really inspiring, especially those who are really terminal ill and they know that their time is almost up, but yet they're still very resilient and still have a lot of love to share and support to give. And it gives you hope in humanity. Let's put it that way.
I don't know, Mary Ellen, if you picked up on it. Stephanie is relatively comfortable talking about death and being around death.
Yeah.
And that is so valuable if you're going to assist others as they're going through that journey. And as she mentioned, it was normalized because of the household she grew up in. Mm-hmm. And it's very obvious that neither of our guests today are some sort of gloom and doom type person. They're the exact opposite. So I think that having that sort of comfort level to the topic of death, and in Stephanie's case, where she says what she loves about it is meeting, getting to know the people and helping them during that time. What a valuable tool to have that give to a family or individuals.
Yeah. And I was really struck by what Lisa had said about the ability to hold space for both grief and joy at the same time. I think that is such a powerful opportunity for us to realize as humans that emotions are not mutually exclusive. It is entirely possible to hold two what seem like conflicting emotions in your body at the same time. And that's what it is to be human.
Well, and I know that there's that guilt with that, right? Like I shouldn't laugh again. And I had a very, very dear friend, and he lost a sister when he was young, like high school. And he said from then on, and it really impacted his character, actually, their household was one where you didn't have joy. That was in memory of. They maintained that. And I get it. I don't know and never want to experience as a parent what that would feel like. But it ended up sort of taking something away from the sibling, for sure. We wondered who usually reaches out to an end-of-life doula. Is it the patient or the family or some sort of combination? And here's what Lisa and Stephanie told us on that.
So is it usually then, Stephanie, the patient themselves who reaches out to a death doula, or is it sometimes the family that reaches out?
It's either or. If they know that we exist, that's the difficult part, right? Is getting out there and making sure that people know that we exist and that we provide this kind of service. So the education piece is something that we're all currently working on, so that people know that they have this as an option and that they don't necessarily need to go into a hospital and be medicated until they pass on, right? There's other options for them. But it is a mix of two. For the individuals who do know that we exist, it could be the patient themselves, it could be the family members, it could be a friend. We get referrals from every which direction, and we accommodate to as many people as we possibly can.
So someone listening might think, you know what? I feel fine, or I know someone who's maybe not well, whatever the circumstance happens to be. Their next question logically would be, how do I reach or get in touch with a death doula? And is there sort of we all have Google, but where would you point someone looking to start that process?
I would point them to the Home Hospice Association website. I believe it's www.homehospiceassociation.com. They have a network of doulas who are already certified and working for them. So they would be referred out to one of us, depending on where they live. So say someone in British Columbia is looking for a death doula out there, they reach out to Home Hospice Association, they would refer them to somebody that's local to them. We try to keep it as minimal distracting, minimal in terms of invasive. We try to keep it as easy as we possibly can for the individual, because we respect that they're going through stuff and they don't necessarily need the additional burden. So we try through the Home Hospice Association to refer out as much as we possibly can.
So Lisa, is it normally the patients themselves who reach out to a death doula, or is it usually the family members?
Again, it can be both. So sometimes it is the person who's dying, and they may have been given a terminal illness, so they know they're going to die, so they want to get things in place. And maybe they do have family members that are not open to discussing what's going to be happening, what they want to happen. So this is a great time actually to bring in a doula to kind of facilitate the conversation between the person who's dying or has the terminal illness and other family members, and just kind of bridge the conversation because people don't know what to talk about. They don't know what they're supposed to talk about, what they're supposed to cover, what they're supposed to gather information wise, or the questions that they're supposed to ask. So it can be family members also that might have a family member who is getting up in age or who is going to be dying, and they just want to provide some services for their loved one. And that loved one may not know about death doulas. So it again can go either way. The main thing is that you have a plan. And I think there's a great little quote out there, is that, would you let your children plan your vacation? And so what that just means is that really you should have everything planned for yourself. And a death doula can help you do that, because your kids might flounder and they might not know what you want, or they might fight about what they think you want. So having a death doula there to kind of get all those things in place. And it is a huge disservice to your children to not have everything in place, because this can cause a lot of issues. And with like, your kids are busy and they have jobs and lives of their own, and to have to go through everything to get things in order after you pass is a lot of work. So if you can have it all done before, it's a gift to your family that you have got everything just ready to go. And like my mom has hymns written down that she wants played at her. So it can be just as specific as that. I had a friend that her mom just passed away recently, and it was quite sudden. And they were looking for the power of attorney. They had papers put out all over the entire floor of their family room looking for this information. And it took them half a day to find it. And the mom was incapacitated. She could not tell them where it was. So like just have a folder of information, or, let your kids know where your stuff is. Don't let your kid, if you wouldn't let your kids plan your vacation, don't let your kids plan your end of life, because we can all rationalize that it's a good idea to have this ready, because about 75% of people do believe that it is important to have our care plan in place, but only 10% of us do. If you are thinking about this now and you want to talk about death, there are places that hold death cafes. And that's just a place where it's usually open to the public, and you can go and have a chat about death. And what the facilitator does is they pose questions just to kind of get you thinking about it. So like one of the questions would be, what does a good death look like to you? And so that's different for everyone. I've facilitated a couple of death cafes, and I will be in the future as well. But these are something that are held worldwide, death cafes. It's like a registered trademark name. And in a death cafe, there's no agenda, there's no schedule. It is just an open-ended discussion about death. So I do encourage, if you are looking to talk about death, then maybe that's something you want to check out.
So essentially, it can be either the patient, maybe someone who's received a diagnosis of a terminal illness, or whose family maybe is reluctant to talk with them about their end of life planning. Or it might be a family member who wants to support their loved one with their end of life planning and may not know how, right?
Right.
Right. And then there's the families where some members are okay talking about death and others are not, or maybe they don't agree on what should happen next. And sometimes that loved one can no longer communicate and didn't leave a clear plan for what they need at the end of their life, right? So they need a death doula to help facilitate those difficult conversations.
Yeah, and it does, and again, we'll come back to how important it is to normalize the conversation when talking about death. And as we discussed in previous episodes, it doesn't mean every time you sit down, that's a topic of conversation. It is going to happen one day. And so never talking about it is certainly not going to make the passing any easier. No. And today's guests they're not negative. They're not pessimistic. They're wonderfully supportive, empathetic people, and they would be kind and compassionate individuals when called upon to help a person who is dying or their family. You mentioned the former VP of the End of Life Doula Association, Sue Phillips, the interview with her. When she was asked what drew her to the profession, she said, it's very rewarding when you're able to sit with a family and help them support each other at this very tender, emotional, and difficult time in their lives. And that is what today's guests mentioned too. They love doing that to help out. And also, I thought when Lisa mentioned the death cafes, now, without any context, I think my first response would be no thanks. However, once she explained it, that how long they've been around and what their function is, it's not imposing, it's not intimidating. You can go in there, you can speak, not speak. It's like any other sort of supportive meeting that way.
Yeah.
And when I went on their website, deathcafe.com, it is so easy to find a location where one is coming up. Yeah. And if you want, you can go down further and find out where one has been and get information from that as well. And there was one right in my town in January, and I had no idea. So it's interesting to see where they've been and where they will be coming up near you. And that's been happening since 2011.
Yeah. So at what point then, we wondered, should someone reach out to an end-of-life doula? And here's what Stephanie and Lisa said.
You'd mentioned, Stephanie, that there are cases where individuals contact in advance of maybe an imminent death or terminal illness, and then those who are in that situation. Is it more likely that people are contacting once they are in a position that maybe they are in a terminal illness, rather than doing that more proactive and contacting earlier?
Oh, 100%, yes. For some reason, we fear death. We don't like to talk about death within our society. And I always say to people, we have two things that are constant, and for sure that's going to happen in our lives. And the first one is making mistakes. We don't like to talk about or making mistakes either. And the second one is death. We're just afraid to talk about it. So unfortunately, people will leave it to the last minute to reach out to seek any form of assistance. But we do encourage people to be proactive, because it as horrible as it sounds, it is imminent that we are going to die at some point in our lives.
Right.
So why not put the pieces into place sooner rather than later, so that you and your family members or friends are not stressing later on in life, right? So, but unfortunately, when it comes to death, we try to ignore it or push it off as much as we possibly can. I find that people are very hesitant to talk about the unknown. And since dying and death is the unknown, we don't necessarily know how it's going to happen or when it's going to happen. People have a tendency just to wait until it's either too late or near to that too late stage. I just would like people to know that don't wait until the last minute to do something like this. Yes, it's a difficult conversation to have, but the more often you have these conversations, the easier things get. And if you be proactive as much as you possibly can, again, like I mentioned before, it will save a lot of stress later on down the road when you actually do need our services. And also would like everyone to know that it's not just for people who are out in the community as well. You don't necessarily have to be in a hospital. You don't have to be in a hospice. You could be at home if you'd like to. I'm currently working with individuals who are incarcerated within an institution in Ontario. I go in and see them because obviously they can't come and see me, and I work through their death plan and anything that they would like to see happen in the future. So it's not just limited to people who are terminally ill, who are dying within the next few months or weeks. It's open to anybody at any point, anywhere that they feel that they're comfortable and that they call home.
I'm wondering, at what point would people often reach out to contact a doula? And is it sort of later in the process because of that, not a phobia, but a fear of talking about death, or just that uncomfortable feeling about it? So would they normally contact later than earlier because of that? Or I know you've got some things to share on that.
Yeah, definitely. So it happens both ways, actually. So a lot of time, like what you were just saying, someone comes upon end of life quite quickly, and they're needing maybe a little bit of guidance, because as you said, it's something that we are not told about or taught, or that we talk about, and trying to maneuver through the system and helping your loved one with the wants and needs that they want at the end of life. You may not even know. So I really encourage people to start early. And I'm a Gen X, and my focus with Death Doula is getting Gen X talking about death, because we're seeing our parents age, and maybe we are going to have to falter through that process. But also, we're getting to the middle of our lives, so we are thinking maybe about the end of our lives too, getting things in order. So it is definitely better if you can start earlier.
Yeah.
And just start thinking about things like what you want, what your wishes are, what you don't want, right? And so there's kind of a bit of both. So people leaving it to the last, and maybe people with conversations like this are starting to think about it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
So and one of the reasons why people do leave it or don't even want to think about it is because of the fears or the stigma around death. And part of what I do is just creating a positive, like they call it death positive talk. So it's making it not so scary, and that this is something that we can talk about, and that's something that we need to talk about. So just to go over a couple of the fears that people have, we are very afraid of being in pain. And that is the biggest one. So we, are just blocking it out. We don't want to think about death, or also being forgotten, and leaving loved ones behind. So there's a lot to think about there. Like, what's going to happen when I'm gone? Will I be remembered? All those things, or how will I be remembered? Also, the loss of control or the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen along the way as we're dying, and then after we're dead, what happens? And then dying alone. People are fearful of dying alone. I have had, conversations with many people about dying, and I've luckily had some really great conversations, and then other ones, people are just like, nope, I'm not talking about that. Right. So there's a lot there to unpack. So the challenge really is to examine for yourself if something's coming up for you around death, or you're feeling like you don't want to talk about it. Examine why is that? What are some of the fears that you have, or what have you been taught about death that makes you fearful?
I think it's safe to say that if the services of a death doula appeals to you, the advice would be contact them sooner rather than later. There would be a lot of advantages of not waiting until the last minute. And I know when my mom passed, it was sudden, and we were totally thrown into a tailspin. None of us knew what to do or how to support each other or what happens next. We were sort of just learning as we went along. And talking with the doula ahead of time would have helped so much, just to create that bridge between we're all okay and now we have to pull together. And I mean, hindsight, right? But let's hope that none of us find ourselves in that position. It was interesting to hear Stephanie say that home is where you are comfortable when you're dying.
Yeah.
And she said that could be your house. And many people want to do that. And I think it was Lisa that said the majority don't get the opportunity for that. It's that show.
That's right.
But it could be your home, a hospice, a hospital. And in cases, obviously, where it applies to someone who is in prison, it could be bringing them comfort there.
Yeah.
Because that's something I would have never thought of, that someone not going to say, oh, well, Mary Ellen, take a walk, that you need that support there. So that definition of home, I thought was very touching.
Yeah. They both brought up fears, right? And boy, fear is a very powerful thing for us as humans, right?
Yeah.
They talked about fear of death and dying because it's an unknown, right? I think for many of us, we associate death and dying perhaps with a fear of being in pain or losing control in some way. And I think for a lot of people that there's this fear that they're going to be forgotten, right? Dying alone is another fear, leaving loved ones behind. These are all natural to have these fears. You're not alone in having them. And you really need to examine the source of where those fears are coming from, because they're coming from whatever you've been taught about death. And, most of us aren't explicitly taught about death. We learn by observation. And so sometimes the things that we fear have been taught to us unconsciously and not necessarily consciously, right? Like you were saying earlier about, well, you certainly can't laugh in a funeral home. Well, you know what? You can.
Yeah. I know we mentioned it earlier in this episode, but again, important to stress, and it's also stressed on the End of Life Doula Association website, that death doulas do not replace hospice workers, for example. They work alongside them, and they are not actively involved in the medical assistance in dying, or MAID, which is a process here in Canada. They comfort, they advocate, for the client. That's their role. And they I think it was Lisa that said you set your personal beliefs aside. It's focusing on that individual, what their beliefs and wishes are, and making sure they're communicated.
Yeah. So thank you so much to both Stephanie and Lisa for being on our podcast and sharing what we feel is really important information with our listeners. And for listeners, we would encourage you to check out any of the number of websites that we've mentioned in this episode. We've talked about, websites if you want more information about becoming a death doula. And there's a couple of websites that we've mentioned that you can go to if you're seeking the services of a death doula near you, or maybe looking for a death cafe.
Right. Yeah. And as always, of course, thank you to everyone who's listening today.
Yeah.
And thanks for being with us. And just before we go, you will have noticed over the last few episodes that Mary Ellen's, I was going to say her quality. I mean the quality of the recording, not the quality of what she input to get her input into the program. And this is her final day on this recording day in the Dominican Republic, where she's been visiting and enjoying, for her, what's a rest, which means having some work with her, and also vacationing in the sun. And so we wish her, all of us will collectively wish you, Mary Ellen, safe trip back.
Thank you.
And if you are, if you have a moment today and listening, feel free to keep up with current and previous episodes on our Facebook, Instagram pages. And you can visit our website where we house all of the previous episodes. And as you'll remember, there's a button you can click and check out what merchandise is available, all kinds of cool stuff there, if you're looking for something for yourself or for someone else in our online store.
So looking ahead to next week, Dave, do you remember in episode 8 when you asked me what TV character I'd most like to be? And I said either Samantha from Bewitched or the oldest Halliwell sister from the TV show Charmed.
I do remember.
Okay. So both of those characters obviously are witches, for anybody who's familiar with either one of those shows. And shortly after that episode hit the airwaves, we had a listener reach out to ask if she could be on our podcast to talk about witch school.
Really?
And yes, and of course we said yes. So next episode, we'll be talking with Kiki Keskinen, who is the founder of Witch School Canada. And I am very excited to learn more about what that is. So until next time, I'm Mary Ellen.
And I'm Dave.
Stay well.
You have been listening to the Retirement Years Podcast, social media marketing and management provided by Madison Sloan at MSS Mad Media. Original music by Theodora Draper. Web design by Gavin Hinton.